Some people spend a lifetime wondering why someone they loved never came home. A brass key appears on a dark porch. No footsteps, no explanation. Just the key, catching moonlight, engraved with 2 letters that belonged to a man who vanished 6 months ago. 3 slow knocks had woken her. The door swings open. Nobody there. Somewhere in the dark, a dog lifts his head toward the old barn. His tail moves once. Not alarm, recognition. And somewhere along a hidden back road, engines are running without headlights, carrying something that was never meant to be found past fields, past sleeping houses, past the grave of a man who watched too long and knew too much. The farmhouse has been waiting. So has the truth. Claire Merritt had not slept in a real bed for 4 months. She told herself it was fine. The back seat of Earl's old pickup was actually pretty comfortable once you figured out the right angle for your shoulders. Ranger took up most of the space anyway, so there was no point complaining about it. The dog weighed 62 pounds and had absolutely no concept of personal boundaries. But that was fine too. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't. And she knew it. And Ranger knew it. And every single morning when she opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling of that old truck cab, the first thing she saw was the water stain that looked like a running deer. And the second thing she did was reach over to the passenger seat and check if Earl's thermos was still there. It was always still there. She never touched it. Every morning Claire set out 2 bowls on the small folding table she kept propped against the tailgate. One bowl was hers, oatmeal, usually. Sometimes just crackers and peanut butter when the budget was tight, which was most of the time. The other bowl was Earl's. She filled it the same way she always had. Coffee, 2 sugars, the way he liked it. She had not stopped doing this. Not once. Not in 6 months. Ranger always walked to Earl's bowl first. He would lower his nose to the rim, breathe in slowly, then lift his head and stare down the county road like he was waiting for headlights to appear around the bend. Some mornings he stood there for a long time. Long enough that Claire would have to whisper, "Hey, old boy, come on," before he finally turned back and began eating from his own bowl. People said dogs didn't understand grief. Ranger understood it better than most people Claire had met. She was 23 years old and she had already buried more than most people twice her age. Her parents went first. A wet November road, a truck that came out of nowhere, and 8-year-old Claire woke up in a hospital room to find her grandfather sitting beside her with his hat in his hands, and his eyes red at the edges. Earl Merritt was not a man who cried easily, but that morning he had been crying for a while, and he didn't bother hiding it. He just took her hand, didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "We're going to be all right, Becca. You and me, we're going to figure this out." He called her Becca sometimes, a nickname that belonged only to him. Earl had been the sheriff of Caldwell County for 11 years before her parents died. After that, grief did what grief does. It took him apart slowly and put him back together wrong. He lost the badge, lost some friends, spent 2 years in a place dark enough that he didn't talk about it, not directly. But Claire understood more as she got older. She understood what it meant when he said he used to keep a bottle in his desk drawer. She understood what it meant when he said he poured it out. The night he saw her sleeping on his couch and realized she still trusted him completely. He had worked after that. Hard and quiet and without complaint. Fences, rooftops, hay bales, anything anyone in Harlow needed done. He rebuilt himself with his hands the same way he rebuilt everything else. Carefully, without rushing. Making sure each piece was solid before moving on to the next. He found Ranger at an abandoned feed store on Route 9 when the dog was barely a year old. Skinny, half wild, scared of everything. Earl sat down on the gravel outside and just waited. Didn't reach out. Didn't call to him. Just sat there until the dog crept close enough to sniff his boot, then his hand, then eventually his knee. That took most of an afternoon. Claire had teased him about it later. You sat in a parking lot for 4 hours for a dog. And Earl had smiled in that quiet way of his. Well, he needed to know I wasn't going anywhere. From that point on, Ranger never left his side. The 3 of them lived small and close and without much extra. No vacations. No restaurant meals unless someone else was paying. But there was always enough firewood and always enough food and always someone home when it mattered. Claire had understood even as a teenager that what they had was not nothing. It was not money or comfort or ease, but it was steady. And steady was more than a lot of people got. Then 6 months ago, Earl vanished. His truck was found on a county road 8 miles outside Harlow. Keys still in the ignition, wallet on the seat, no sign of struggle, no explanation. Ranger had been sitting outside the driver's door when the deputy arrived. He would not move. They had to carry him. The official search lasted 11 days. Then it ended. People moved on the way people do. They brought casseroles and said their words and squeezed Claire's hand at the diner counter and told her Earl was a good man. He was. She knew that, but knowing it didn't tell her where he went. It didn't explain the empty seat at the table or the thermos she couldn't bring herself to wash. Or why Ranger still checked that county road every single morning like he was keeping watch. Claire had lost her apartment 2 months after the search ended. The money ran out the way money does when you stop being able to concentrate on anything. She had sold what she could, packed what remained into the truck, and started living out of the bed, with Ranger pressed against her side every night. She wasn't proud of it. She wasn't ashamed either. She was just surviving, which is all she had been doing when the letter arrived. A lawyer's office in Harlow. A man named Gordon Pelton, with a pressed shirt and reading glasses he kept removing and replacing on his nose. The office smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner. Pelton read the document in a steady voice that suggested he had read a great many of these documents and felt nothing particular about any of them. Standard language. Standard terms. The property located at 14 Merritt Road, Caldwell County, Tennessee, formerly known as the Merritt Farm. When he said that name, he looked down at the desk, not at the paper. Claire noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. She had not expected this. Earl had mentioned the farm once or twice years ago, when they drove past it on the long road to the county fair. Old Merritt Place, he'd said, as if it were someone else's history and not his own. It had belonged to his grandfather, and then to no one in particular, and it had been sitting empty so long that the county had nearly taken it for back taxes twice. People in Harlow called it worthless. Some called it worse things. There were small-town rumors the way there always are, the kind that attach to any old property with boarded windows and a weather vane that doesn't turn anymore. Earl had looked at it differently. He had slowed the truck without meaning to, just for a moment, and said something Claire had stored away without understanding. Forgotten places aren't always empty, Becca. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone who still believes they're worth saving. She had not thought about those words in years. Now they were the only thing she could think about. She signed the papers Gordon Pelton set in front of her. He was efficient about it, businesslike. But when she reached the last page, he cleared his throat and said there was one more item. An envelope. He slid it across the desk without looking at her directly. Earl had left it with instructions that it be given to her only at the time of transfer. The envelope was sealed. Earl's handwriting on the front. Her name. Just her name in the way he always wrote it. 2 letters he never rushed through. She put it in her jacket pocket. She did not open it in Pelton's office. She was not going to cry in front of Gordon Pelton. The drive out to Merritt Road took 40 minutes. The afternoon had gone gray and cool, and the fields on either side of the road looked like they were settling in for a long sleep. Tennessee autumn was not dramatic the way autumn was in the movies. It was quieter than that. The color just slowly drained from things, and one morning you looked up, and the trees were bare, and you couldn't quite remember when it happened. The farmhouse came into view around a long curve in the road. Claire stopped the truck and just looked at it for a moment. It was smaller than she remembered. The white paint had gone the color of old dishwater. The porch leaned slightly to the left, just enough to notice. One of the upstairs shutters hung crooked on a single hinge. The barn out back had lost most of its red to weather and time, and was now a kind of faded rose color, which would have been pretty in different circumstances. It was, by any practical measure, a wreck. Ranger had his nose pressed against the passenger window. His tail was moving. Claire looked at him. "You've been here before, haven't you?" He didn't answer. He just waited for her to open the door. She did. He jumped out before she had fully stopped the engine, landed soft in the gravel, and walked straight to the porch steps without hesitating. Sat down in front of the door like he had been there 100 times. Because she realized, he probably had. Earl used to bring him everywhere. She took the envelope from her jacket pocket and stood there in the cooling afternoon air looking at it for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully and put it back. Not yet. She wanted to see the place first, before she read whatever Earl had left for her to find. The front door opened more easily than she expected. The key was on the ring with the others from Pelton's office, and it turned without resistance, like the lock had been maintained recently, which was strange, because everything else about this place suggested no one had been here in years. Inside, the house smelled like old pine and dust, and the particular cold that settles into a building when no fire has been lit in a long time. Furniture still in place, a rocking chair near the window, a bookshelf with maybe 30 books tilted at different angles. The kitchen had a small table with 2 chairs pushed in neatly, and a coffee mug hanging on a hook above the sink. The mug said, "Home is where love waits," in faded letters. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at that mug for a while. She couldn't explain why it made her throat tighten, except that she knew exactly why. Because home was exactly what she had not had for 6 months, and here was this old cracked mug with its cheerful little saying, hanging in this cold and empty kitchen like it had been waiting for someone to read it. She found a box of matches and lit the fireplace. It smoked a little at first, then caught. Ranger stretched out in front of it immediately. She unpacked what she had. 2 bags, 1 box. A photo album Earl had given her years ago. His pocket knife, which she carried everywhere now. A quilt her grandmother had made before Claire was born, in colors that had faded to the softest possible version of what they once were. That was most of it. That was what a life looked like when you packed in a hurry and kept only what you couldn't stand to lose. She heated soup on the stove. The burners worked. That was something. Outside, the dark came quickly the way it does in October. No streetlights on Merritt Road, no neighbors close enough to see. The sky was enormous and full of stars in a way that the city never was. And Claire stood on the porch after dinner, with her arms crossed against the cold, and looked up at them for a long time. Ranger sat beside her. His ears moved once, then again. She followed his gaze out toward the road, then toward the barn. Nothing there. Just the field and the dark and the wind moving through dry grass with a sound like shuffled paper. She whispered, "You miss him too." Ranger pressed his head against her leg. She went inside at 10 o'clock, checked the windows and the front door lock, spread the old quilt across the bed upstairs. Ranger lay down in the hallway outside her door. She reached down and scratched his ears and said, "You don't have to guard me." And he simply closed his eyes in a way that meant he was going to do it anyway. Sleep came fast. It didn't last. She came awake all at once. The room was dark. The fire downstairs had burned to embers, and there was just the faintest orange glow visible under the bedroom door. The old clock on the dresser said 11:17. She lay still for a moment, trying to understand what had pulled her out of sleep. Then she heard it. Knock. 3 beats. Slow and even. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 careful knocks, like someone who knew you were home and had all the time in the world. Ranger was already up. His nails clicked against the wood floor as he moved to the top of the stairs. He wasn't growling, wasn't barking, just standing at the top of the stairs, with his ears at full attention, pointed toward the front of the house, which was somehow worse than barking would have been. Ranger barked at strangers. He went quiet when he was trying not to be noticed. Claire got up, put her boots on, didn't turn on any lights, came downstairs in the dark with one hand on the wall for guidance, and found the front door and stood there for a moment, with her heart doing something uncomfortable in her chest. Earl's voice from some old memory. "Never open a door because you're afraid, Becca. Open it because you've decided to know the truth." She unlocked the deadbolt, turned the handle. The door swung open onto the porch. Nothing. Cold air and moonlight and the long dark field stretching out to the road. She stepped out and looked left and looked right. No car in the drive. No footsteps in the gravel that she could see. No one walking away down the road. Just the night, quiet and enormous and completely indifferent. Ranger moved past her to the edge of the porch, nose down, working slowly along the wooden boards. He got to the top step and stopped, lifted his head toward the barn. His tail moved once, slowly, not excited. Recognition. Claire looked at the barn, just a dark shape against a slightly lighter sky. Still, Empty. She almost turned back, almost told herself it was nothing. Wind. Maybe. Old house noises. The kind of things that seemed sinister at midnight and embarrassing at breakfast. But then she looked down. There was something on the porch, right against the doorframe, where she would have stepped over it on her way out. A small object. She bent and picked it up. A key. Brass, old but recently polished, heavier than it looked, and engraved on the grip in small, careful letters, E.M. She turned it over in her palm. E.M. Earl Merritt. Her breath went somewhere. She wasn't sure where. Ranger was watching her. She closed her fingers around the key. Tomorrow, she said quietly. Tomorrow I'll figure out what you're trying to tell me. She barely slept the rest of the night. Every time the house settled, she was awake again. But no more knocking came. When morning arrived, it came gray and slow, and the farmhouse looked completely different in daylight. Less like something out of a bad dream. More like something that simply needed work. She read Earl's letter over coffee. She had put it off long enough. Becca, if you're reading this, then the farm is yours, and Ranger trusted you enough to bring you here. Trust him back. He has better instincts than most people I've known. She smiled at that. It was so exactly him. There are things about this farm I couldn't explain while you were growing up. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I wanted you to have a normal life for as long as possible. But you're not a kid anymore. And there are things you need to know. Start with the barn. Start with what you find there. Don't talk to anyone in Harlow about it until you understand what you're looking at. And Becca, watch their eyes before you listen to their words. That's where the truth always hides. She read it twice. Then she stood up and looked out the kitchen window at the barn. Ranger was already at the back door. She thought, well, all right then. The morning was cold and still. The grass was heavy with dew and left dark marks on her boots as she walked. Ranger moved ahead of her, nose down, cutting a deliberate path toward the barn rather than a straight one, circling slightly to the right before approaching. He had been here before. That was becoming very clear. The main barn doors were unlocked but warped, and it took 2 hands and some weight to get the left one open enough to slip through. Inside, old stalls, rusted equipment, a smell of hay that had been dry for years, light coming in through gaps in the roof. Nothing that looked like it had been touched recently. Ranger was not interested in the inside of the barn. He went around it. Claire followed him around the back corner to a narrow space between the barn wall and an old rain barrel pressed against it. The rain barrel was heavy. She would not have thought to look behind it, but Ranger stopped beside it and looked at the wall. And when Claire looked at the wall, she saw the outline of a door. Barely, just the faint seam of a frame set into the weathered boards, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. She pulled the rain barrel out far enough to get past it. The door was low, maybe 5 feet. A handle you wouldn't notice unless you knew to look. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the brass key. She told herself it probably wouldn't fit. It fit perfectly. The lock turned smooth as butter, like it had been oiled recently. The door swung inward on silent hinges. The room was small. Small enough that she had to duck to enter. A single desk, a chair, a narrow window on the far wall covered by a piece of burlap, and on the floor directly in the center of the room, a green metal toolbox. Claire stopped breathing for a moment. She knew that toolbox. She had carried it to the pawn shop in Harlow herself 4 months ago, when the money ran out the second time. She had gotten $40 for it. She remembered because she had sat in the parking lot afterward and cried for 20 minutes, which was not something she did often. Selling Earl's toolbox had felt like selling a piece of him. She had done it anyway because she needed to eat, and here it was. On the floor of a room she hadn't known existed until 10 minutes ago. Clean. No dust on the lid, recently placed. Which meant Earl had gone to the pawn shop. He had bought it back. He had done that, and then brought it here, and that meant he had been here after she sold it, which meant he had known she would sell it, which meant he had planned all of this, and he had done it while he still could, while he still had time, which meant he had known he was running out of it. She sat down on the floor. Ranger came and sat beside her. For a moment she just breathed. Then she opened the toolbox. Inside, arranged carefully, not the way someone stores tools, but the way someone stores things they need to be found. A flashlight, a compass, a folded county map, old but clearly used, 2 notebooks, a smaller envelope, and on top of everything, a larger envelope. Her name on the front, that same familiar handwriting. She picked up the smaller envelope first. Inside, a single sheet of paper. One line, written in blue ink, careful and deliberate. Check the land transfers. Whitfield Agricultural. 2019 through 2022. She read it twice, set it aside, opened the larger envelope. Becca. The toolbox is there because I needed to be sure it ended up in the right place. I knew you'd sell it eventually. You are practical the way your mother was practical, which is one of the best things about you. I bought it back the same week. Don't feel bad about it. I needed it here, and now it is. She pressed her hand against her eyes for a moment, then kept reading. Some people in Harlow are not what they appear. I spent a long time not wanting to believe that, because they were people I liked, people I trusted. Some of them I called friends for 30 years. But I have been watching, and I have been writing it down, and what I've found is not nothing. The notebooks will explain. Read them slowly. Don't rush the conclusions. Just look at what's there. The map is important. The marked roads are important. The locations I've circled are not random. Don't go to the sheriff's office in Harlow. Don't. I mean that. If something happens before I can explain all of this myself, you go to Boyd Harmon in Dunmore. He was 2 years behind me at the county academy. He's the only one I'm sure about. And Becca. I know this is a lot. I know it's not fair. Dropping all of this into your lap when you came here to rest and start over. I'm sorry for that. Truly. But you were always better at this than you knew. She sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. The room was very quiet. Outside the burlap-covered window, a bird called once and went silent. She thought about Gordon Pelton's eyes going to the desk when he said the name of this farm. She thought about the way he had been so efficient, so careful to say only what was necessary. She thought about how, looking back, he had not once asked how she was doing, which was something even strangers usually managed. She picked up the county map. It was folded along old crease lines, worn at the corners. When she opened it, she saw the marks Earl had made in blue ink. The farmhouse. 3 other locations along a road that ran behind the main highway, and 1 location circled twice. Whitfield Agricultural Supply and Feed, about 4 miles south on County Road 7. Whitfield. She knew that name. Dale Whitfield had been at Earl's memorial gathering at the Harlow Diner. He had arrived early and stayed late. He had shaken Claire's hand and held it with both of his, and said, Earl was the finest man he had ever known. His eyes had been red. She had thought at the time that his grief was genuine, that he was one of the few people there who actually felt something. She looked at the name on the map. She looked at it for a long time. Ranger suddenly stood, not fast, not alarmed, just deliberate. He moved to the narrow window, pressed his nose against the burlap, and went very still. Claire clicked off the flashlight. The room went dark except for the thin line of light around the window's edges. She heard it. Footsteps in the gravel outside the barn. Slow and even. 2 sets, she thought. Moving along the far side of the building toward the back corner. Toward where she was. She didn't move. Voices low. A man's voice, cupola tire tracks by the gate. Somebody's been here. A second voice, could be kids. First voice, gate wasn't forced. Key or the latch is broken. A pause. Gravel shifted. Second voice, you want to check inside? First voice, after a moment, no. Just watch the house. If there's lights tonight, call it in. Call it in. Claire's hand found Ranger's back in the dark. He was warm and solid and completely still. Call it in to who? She thought. And then she thought, don't answer that yet. Just wait. She waited. The footsteps slowly moved away. She heard a car door. An engine. Gravel under tires, moving toward the road. She counted to 60. Then she let herself breathe. She reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. Just held it. Just sat in the dark with Ranger and the smell of old wood and Earl's notebooks and the county map and the piece of paper with 1 line of blue ink on it. Check the land transfers. Whitfield Agricultural. 2019 through 2022. She had not looked toward the window when the men were outside. That had been instinct. Some old careful part of her brain saying, don't let them know you know they're there. But she had looked toward the door, and through the thin gap at the hinge side, she had seen a slice of the outside world for just a moment before she killed the light. She had seen the side of a vehicle, white, lettered. She had not been able to read the full lettering, just the lower part, just the last word, department, and below it, smaller, Caldwell County, not Whitfield's trucks, not a neighbor stopping by. Caldwell County Sheriff's Department. She sat with that for a very long time. Earl's letter said, "Don't go to the sheriff's office in Harlow." He had been specific. He had underlined it. Don't. Not probably don't. Not be careful. Don't. Now she understood why. She turned the brass key over in her fingers in the dark EM on the grip, warm from her hand. She thought about a man who had driven to a pawn shop to buy back his own toolbox so that his granddaughter would be able to find the things she needed in a room she didn't know existed yet. She thought about what kind of planning that required, what kind of patience, what kind of fear, quiet and managed, the kind you don't show to anyone. She thought, he was afraid. The whole time he was afraid. And he did all of this anyway. Outside the morning had gone fully bright. She could hear birds now, whined in the dry grass along the fence line. She picked up the first notebook and held it in her lap in the dark. She was not going anywhere. Earl had trusted her with this. She was not going to let him down. Ranger settled against her side, patient and warm and already waiting for whatever came next. 3 days passed before Claire touched the notebooks again. Not because she was afraid of them, because she needed to think about what she already knew before she added more to it. Earl had always said that. Don't fill a cup that's already full. Sit with what you have. Let it settle. Then look again. So she sat with it, and while she sat with it, she worked. The porch railing needed 2 new boards and a coat of paint. The gutters were so full of leaves they had begun to pull away from the eaves on the north side. 3 fence posts along the road had rotted through at the base and needed replacing, which meant a trip to the hardware store in Harlow, and a morning of digging in ground that had gone hard with early frost. She did all of it. Every morning she was outside before the mist lifted, boots and work gloves and whatever tool the task required. She moved steadily and without hurrying, which was something Earl had taught her. Hurrying is just fear with a hammer in its hand, he used to say. It doesn't help the nail go in straighter. To anyone driving past on Merritt Road, she was just a young woman trying to make an old place livable. Nothing to look at twice. Nothing to think about after you turned the corner. That was exactly what she wanted them to think, because while her hands worked the fence and the gutters and the porch, her eyes were learning the road. She began to notice things. A blue pickup that appeared twice in one afternoon from opposite directions, which meant it had turned around somewhere and come back. Fresh tire tracks in the soft shoulder near the south gate, though no one had stopped or knocked. And a gate at the far end of the property, the one that opened onto the back field that she was almost certain she had latched on her second morning there. She found it unlatched on the 4th. She wrote all of it down. Time, direction, vehicle description where she had it. She kept the notebook in her jacket pocket, which made her feel slightly ridiculous, like a child playing detective, except it also made her feel like Earl, and that was enough. On the 5th morning, a vehicle turned into the driveway and Claire's shoulders went tight the way they always did now, when something arrived unannounced. Ranger lifted his head from the porch boards where he had been sleeping in a patch of thin October sun. He looked at the vehicle. His tail moved once, slow, not alarmed. An older woman stepped out carrying a basket with a checked cloth over the top. She was maybe 68, short and solid, with gray hair pinned back and the kind of face that had been friendly so long it had settled into that expression permanently. "You must be Earl's granddaughter," she said. Claire set down the paintbrush. "I am, Ruth Calloway. I'm about 1.5 miles up the road." She held up the basket. "I used to bring your grandfather peach preserves every few weeks. He always said my preserves were better than anything he could make himself," which was true, but he also burned everything he cooked, so the bar was not especially high. Claire almost smiled. "That sounds right." Ruth looked around the farmhouse, took in the new porch boards, the cleared gutters, the mended fence line visible from the drive. "He would have liked seeing this," she said. "Did you know him well?" "About 12 years. Since he started coming out here regularly. He was a quiet man. but kind. The kind of quiet that makes you feel settled instead of shut out. Claire studied her. When you say regularly, how often? Ruth tilted her head slightly. At least twice a month the last 3 years. Sometimes more. He never said exactly why, and I didn't push. Earl was the kind of man who'd tell you what he wanted you to know when he was ready to tell it. Not before. Did he seem different? The last year or so? The older woman was quiet for a moment. He seemed careful, she said finally. More careful than before. Like a man who was watching where he put his feet. Claire felt the back of her neck prickle. Did he ever say anything? About anyone in Harlow? Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, he stopped trusting people he used to call friends. That was all he said about it directly. But there was one other thing. She set the basket down on the porch railing and opened it. Underneath the cloth and the jar of preserves was an envelope. Plain, sealed. Claire's name on the front in Earl's handwriting. He gave me this 8 months ago, Ruth said. Told me to hold on to it. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to Claire before I gave it to anyone else, and that I should give it to her in person. Not mail it, not leave it with anyone. Claire took the envelope. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. He also said something else that I've thought about many times since, Ruth said quietly. He said if anything happens to me, tell Claire to trust Ranger before she trusts anyone else, including any lawyer. The word lawyer landed in the room between them, like something dropped from a height, including any lawyer. Gordon Pelton's eyes going to the desk. Claire held the envelope carefully and said, Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for keeping this. The older woman nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more. Then she seemed to decide against it. She told Claire she was welcome anytime, that the door was always open, and she drove back up the road in the direction she had come from. Claire waited until the sound of the engine faded. Then she sat down on the porch steps and opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Folded once. Earl's handwriting, steady and small. Check the land transfers. Whitfield Agricultural, 2019 through 2022. And check Deputy Tom Reeves. September last year. County Road 7. She had already seen the first line. It was the same as the note in the toolbox. But Reeves was new. Tom Reeves. She knew that name. Deputy with the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office. Had been for at least 10 years. She had seen him at the diner, at the hardware store, at the 4th of July thing they did every year at the fairgrounds. Friendly enough. Not memorable. The kind of person you had seen so many times they became part of the scenery. And he had been part of the scenery the morning Earl's truck was found. She remembered that now. Someone had mentioned it at the diner, weeks after. Reeves was the first one on scene. Had the road blocked off before anyone else arrived. She folded the paper, put it in her jacket pocket with the notebook. Sat there for a moment looking at Ranger. He looked back at her with those steady amber eyes and she thought, You already know all of this, don't you? You've known since the beginning. He put his chin on her knee, which was not a denial. The county library in Harlow was small and smelled like old carpet and copy toner, and it was staffed on Tuesdays by a woman in her 70s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not ask questions about why you needed the property records index. Claire was grateful for that. Land transfers were public record. That was the thing about public record. It meant anyone could look. It just meant most people didn't bother. She spent 3 hours with the index and a notepad and came out into the gray October afternoon with 4 pages of notes and a headache and a very specific sick feeling in her stomach. 3 parcels of agricultural land, all within a half-mile of County Road 7. All transferred to Whitfield Agricultural Supply and Feed between March 2019 and August 2022. All sold at prices well below the assessed county value. 20 to 40% below in 2 cases. Almost 60% below in 1. The sellers, an elderly couple who had moved to assisted living in Knoxville. A widow in her mid-70s whose children lived out of state. And a man named Walter Grimes, 74 years old, who had farmed on County Road 7 for 31 years. Walter Grimes had not moved to assisted living. Walter Grimes had died 14 months ago in a single-vehicle accident on County Road 7. The official report listed it as loss of control on a curve. No other vehicles involved. The investigating officer, Deputy Tom Reeves. She sat in the truck in the library parking lot and read that part twice. Then a third time. Loss of control on a curve. On a road Walter Grimes had driven for 31 years. No other vehicles involved. She opened the notebook, wrote the date of the accident, wrote Reeves's name, drew a line connecting it to the land transfer. Walter Grimes's parcel had transferred to Whitfield Agricultural 4 months before his death, which meant the sale had already happened. So it wasn't about the land directly, but it might have been about what Grimes knew, or what he had seen, or what he had started asking about. She closed the notebook, started the truck. Ranger was watching her from the passenger seat with the patient expression he wore when he had already figured something out and was waiting for her to catch up. She said, I know. Give me a minute. He rested his chin on the center console. She thought, Earl was watching this road. He was watching Whitfield. He noted Reeves in September last year, which was 5 months before he disappeared. He had enough to see the shape of it, but not enough to prove it. Not yet. That was the thing about Earl. He would not accuse a man he couldn't prove guilty. That was not righteousness. That was just how he was built. You didn't name someone until you were sure. You didn't burn a relationship or a reputation on a feeling. You watched. You wrote it down. You waited for the thing that made it undeniable. She drove back to Merritt Farm. She began reading the notebooks that night. Earl's handwriting was small and efficient, the way it always was. No flourishes, just information. Dates, times, descriptions. He had been documenting since the spring of 2021. 3 years of observations, written in 2 notebooks that she had to read with the flashlight tilted just right to catch the pencil marks on the older pages. The pattern emerged slowly, the way patterns do when you're inside them. Trucks on County Road 7, Tuesday and Friday nights. Always between 11 at night and 2 in the morning. Always with headlights dimmed on the stretch between the old grain elevator and Whitfield's property boundary. Sometimes 2 trucks, sometimes 3, never stopping anywhere visible, moving like they knew exactly where they were going because they had been going there for a long time. Earl had noted the same vehicles across multiple weeks. He had noted the routes. He had noted that the old Greystone grain elevator, which had been decommissioned and sold to a private buyer in 2020, sat directly on the route. He had noted, in a margin note written smaller than the rest, that the private buyer of Greystone was listed in the county records as an LLC with a name she didn't recognize, but that the registered agent of the LLC was Gordon Pelton. She stopped reading. The lawyer who had handled Earl's estate, who had looked at his desk when he said the name of this farm, who had been described by Earl in a letter as someone Claire should not trust. The same Gordon Pelton was the registered agent for the company that owned Greystone Elevator. She sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. All right, she thought. All right. So it's not just Whitfield. Pelton is in it too. And Reeves covers the road. And between the 3 of them they have the land, the lawyer to move it legally, and the badge to make sure no one looks too closely at what happens on County Road 7 at midnight on a Tuesday, she thought. Earl knew all of this. He knew it, and he sat on it and he waited. For what? For what was he waiting? She looked at the margin note again. She looked at the date beside it. That note had been written 6 weeks before Earl disappeared. She put the notebook down very carefully, like it was fragile. She understood something then that she had not understood before. Earl was not just watching, he was building a case. He was trying to make sure that when the moment came, whatever he brought forward would be solid enough that no one could dismiss it. No one could call it the suspicions of an old man with a grudge. No one could look the other way because the evidence was thin. He was being meticulous because he knew the people he was watching had power in this county, and he knew that thin evidence would not be enough. She pressed her hand flat against the cover of the notebook. She thought, what did you find in the last 6 weeks? What did you find that scared you enough to make the call to Boyd Harmon? She didn't know yet, but she was going to find out. 2 days later, she drove into Harlow for paint and supplies. She was in the parking lot of the hardware store loading bags into the truck when she heard her name. She turned. Dale Whitfield was walking across the lot toward her. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with gray hair and a face that had spent decades in Tennessee weather, and looked it. He wore a canvas jacket with the Whitfield Agricultural logo on the chest. He was smiling, the same open, unhurried smile she remembered from the memorial gathering. "Your grandfather would have been glad to see you fixing up that old place," he said. She returned a polite smile. She hoped so. He stopped a comfortable distance away, glanced at the truck, at the paint cans, at Ranger, who was sitting in the passenger seat watching through the window. Whitfield looked at Ranger for just a moment. Something crossed his face, quick and controlled, and then gone. Not surprise, not warmth, recognition. "If you ever need a hand with anything out there," he said, looking back at her, "just say the word. I've got a crew that does property work in the off-season. Good rates for neighbors. That's very kind. I'll keep it in mind." He touched the brim of his cap. "You do that. Good to see you, Claire." He walked back toward his truck. She loaded the last paint can. She did not watch him go. She kept her movements easy and unhurried, and did not look over her shoulder until she heard his engine start and the tires on gravel moving away. Then she stood very still beside the truck. He had looked at Ranger with recognition. Not the way you look at a dog you've heard about. Not the polite, "Oh, is that the famous Ranger I've been told of" kind of look. The way you look at something you have seen before. Up close. Possibly recently. She thought about the unlatched gate on the fourth morning. She thought about Ranger not barking when he heard footsteps at odd hours. He didn't bark because he stayed quiet when he was trying not to be noticed. But there was another time Ranger didn't bark. When it was someone he already knew. She drove home. She did not say anything out loud because there was no one to say anything to except Ranger, and Ranger already knew. That evening she sat at the kitchen table, with the county map and her notebook, and she went back through everything she had. She drew a line connecting the marked locations on County Road 7, the farmhouse, the 3 transferred parcels, Greystone Elevator, Whitfield's main property. It was almost perfectly linear, a route, a clean, hidden route along a back road that ran parallel to the highway but was invisible from it. A road that a truck could use at midnight without anyone on the highway seeing it. She thought about what Earl had written in the margins of his second notebook. Not just trucks, not just headlights. Equipment, he had written. Heavy. Can't see it under the tarps, but the axle weight on that truck is not grain or fertilizer. She did not know what it was, not yet. But she knew someone who might. Her eyes went to the entry she had written 8 days ago. 10:18 a.m. Dark pickup traveling toward Whitfield property from the south. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went outside. The night was cold and clear, no moon yet. Just stars and the sound of wind in the bare field. She stood on the porch until her eyes adjusted. Then she went to the back window of the house, the one that faced County Road 7 across the far field. She had been standing there for about 40 minutes, just watching, when the first headlight appeared, distant, dimmed, moving slowly. A second set followed it. 2 trucks, moving north along County Road 7, about a mile out behind the tree line. No noise this far, just the lights, there and then not as they passed behind the stand of old oaks at the field's edge. She checked her watch. 11:38 at night Tuesday. She wrote it down. The headlights disappeared behind the trees in the direction of Greystone Elevator, and then she saw the third thing. After the trucks had passed, after maybe 15 minutes, a single vehicle came from the other direction. Not a truck, a cruiser, black and white and familiar. It drove slowly along County Road 7 in the same direction the trucks had gone. No lights on the roof, no speed. Just rolling along at an idle pace like a man out for a slow evening drive. She couldn't read the markings at this distance in the dark. She didn't need to. She knew what county this road was in. She wrote 11:53 p.m. Single cruiser northbound on CR7, following approximately 15 minutes after 2 commercial vehicles, no lights. She put the notebook down on the windowsill and looked out at the dark field and the road beyond it. All right, she thought. All right. You were a watcher, Earl, and you built me into one too without me even knowing it. All those camping trips, all those wildlife journals, all those times you told me to write down what I saw before I tried to explain it. You were training me, you just never told me what for. She went to bed eventually. She slept lightly. And in the morning she got up and went to the south fence line and walked it slowly, looking at the soft ground near the posts, and she found what she had half expected to find. Boot prints. 2 sets. Large. Pressed deep enough that they had been made recently, when the ground was wet, which meant 2 nights ago, when there had been a hard rain. Someone had walked the fence line on the outside, from the roadside, measuring the distance to the house maybe, or checking sight lines, or just confirming that someone was in fact living here. She photographed the boot prints with her phone. She went inside. She made coffee. She sat down and opened the first notebook to a page she had marked the night before. Earl's entry from 11 months ago, written in pencil so light she'd almost missed it. Ranger won't settle tonight. Keeps going to the south window. I trust him more than I trust myself some days. Something is wrong. I don't know yet what it is, but it's close, and it knows I'm watching. She read that twice, closed the notebook. Looked at Ranger. I know, she said. He knew too. Ranger put his head on his paws. They sat together in the kitchen for a while, the two of them, in the quiet morning, and outside the frost was still on the grass, and the field was still, and the road, beyond it, was empty for now, and everything looked exactly like nothing was wrong, which was exactly how the people on the other side of it wanted it to look. She knew that now. She was counting on them, not knowing that she knew. On the afternoon of the 9th day, she went back to the room behind the barn. She had left the second notebook there. She didn't want to risk carrying both of them in the house in case anyone came while she was in Harlow. The room felt safer, hidden. Earl had kept his most important things here, and she trusted his judgment about that even now. She sat in the low chair with the flashlight, propped against the wall, and opened the second notebook to the section she had not yet read. The last third, written in the months before he disappeared. The handwriting was the same, but the entries were shorter, like a man who had started to run low on time and was making every word count. She read. She read for 2 hours, and when she got to the last entry, she sat very still for a long time. It was dated 12 days before Earl disappeared. 6 months and 12 days ago, in the math she had stopped doing consciously, because it made her chest hurt. The last entry was short. I found it. All of it. I know what's moving through Greystone. I know who signs off on the shipments. I know why Grimes had to go quiet. I'm not putting it here, because if this notebook is found before Claire reads it, I don't want to hand them anything useful. But I've sent what I have to Boyd. He'll have it now. I told him, if he doesn't hear from me in a week, to check in with Claire. I hope he does. I hope she comes to this room and finds this and understands what she's looking at. Because if she does, it means she's already safer than she thinks. He knows her. He knows she won't be reckless. He knows she'll do this the right way. And then the last line, smaller. Written in the right margin like an afterthought, but Claire knew Earl well enough to know he never wrote anything as an afterthought. I am more proud of that girl than she will ever know. She closed the notebook. She held it against her chest with both hands. She did not cry. She had cried in the parking lot of the pawn shop over his toolbox, and she had cried in the hospital waiting room when they told her his truck had been found empty, and she had cried more times than she could count in the back of that old pickup in the dark, with Ranger pressed against her, and the Tennessee night quiet around them. She was done crying. She was done with the part where she was just surviving. She opened the notebook again to the last entry. Read it once more. Steady this time. Taking it in. Boyd Harmon. Earl said he'd sent what he had to Boyd Harmon in Dunmore. Not told him. Sent. Which meant documentation. Physical evidence maybe. Or at minimum, a record of what he'd found. Which meant Boyd Harmon had been sitting in Dunmore for 6 months waiting for a call that hadn't come. She thought. I need to go to Dunmore. She thought. Soon. Not tomorrow. I need one more thing first. She came out of the room and relocked the door and put the key back in her jacket pocket. The afternoon was going gray, the light dropping fast the way it did in October, and the field behind the barn was already in shadow. Ranger was waiting for her outside the rain barrel. He had not followed her into the room. He never did. It was as though he understood the room was Earl's space even now, and he stood guard outside of it instead. She scratched behind his ears. Then he turned. He walked toward the far corner of the property, toward the old oak tree at the edge of the north field. She had seen him go out there before, without following. Now she followed. He stopped at the base of the tree. The roots were thick and gnarled, and the ground between them was covered in fallen leaves. He nosed at the leaves once. Then he looked at her. She crouched down. She moved leaves aside with her hands. The ground underneath was loose. Noticeably loose, in a small area about the size of a shoebox, in a way that the surrounding soil was not. She dug with her hands, the cold earth coming up in dark clumps. Her fingers touched something solid. A box, small and gray, and made from the kind of waterproof plastic that survives years in the ground. She lifted it out, wiped the dirt from the lid. Inside were 2 photographs. The first was black and white. 2 young men, in sheriff's department uniforms, standing beside a patrol car. She recognized Earl immediately, young and straight-backed and smiling in a way she had rarely seen in photographs. Beside him, one hand resting on Earl's shoulder with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times, was another man. She turned the photograph over. 5 words written in Earl's hand. Some friendships don't survive the truth. She looked at the second photograph. This one was in color, more recent, maybe 2 years old, given the model of the cruiser in the background. Earl and Tom Reeves, standing in what looked like the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office break room. Earl was holding a folder, passing it to Reeves. Reeves was taking it, both of them looking straight at the camera. Neither of them knew anyone was taking this picture. She looked at the first photograph again. The young man beside Earl, older now, with gray where there had been dark hair, and heavier through the jaw. But the way he stood, the way the hand rested on the shoulder, that easy, practiced warmth. Dale Whitfield, Earl and Dale Whitfield, young and smiling, best friends or something close to it in the parking lot of the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department. And then, 30 years later, Earl and Tom Reeves, Earl handing over a folder, Reeves accepting it, a document exchange that someone photographed covertly. She sat back on her heels and looked at Ranger. He looked back at her calmly. Because, she thought, because Earl had kept these here, not in the toolbox, not in the notebook room, out here, under the tree, in the ground. The things too personal for the evidence box, but too important to lose. He had known about Whitfield for a long time. He had possibly known something about Reeves even before he started writing it down. And one photograph was about betrayal, and the other was about evidence. She put both photographs carefully into her jacket pocket, beside the notebook and the folded county map and the brass key and the slip of paper from Ruth's envelope. She was carrying a lot of Earl's things now, but it wasn't heavy. That was the thing she hadn't expected. It wasn't heavy at all. She walked back across the field toward the farmhouse. The lights were off inside, and from the road it probably looked empty. That was fine. She preferred it that way. She had a phone call to make in the morning. Not to anyone in Caldwell County. 40 miles north in Dunmore there was a sheriff who had been waiting 6 months for someone to call him. She was going to stop making him wait. She left before sunrise. Ranger rode in the passenger seat the way he always did. Chin on the window edge, eyes on the road. Steady and quiet and present in the way that only old dogs manage. The kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. Claire drove with Earl's 2 notebooks on the seat between them, wrapped in a dish towel she had taken from the kitchen hook. The county map was folded in her jacket pocket. The photographs were in the glove box in a Ziploc bag she had found in a kitchen drawer. Her own notebook was on top of the wrapped bundle, open to the last page of notes she had written the night before. 40 miles to Dunmore. She drove them in silence. The sun came up somewhere around the halfway point. It came up slow and orange over the eastern ridgeline, the kind of sunrise that in other circumstances would have made her pull over just to look at it. Earl used to do that. Just stop the truck and watch the sky for a few minutes without saying anything, and then get back in and drive like it was the most normal thing in the world. She had thought it was embarrassing when she was 15. She had thought it was beautiful by the time she was 20. She didn't stop this morning, but she noticed it. The Dunmore County Sheriff's Office was a brick building on the main street, 2 stories, with an American flag out front that needed replacing, and a parking lot that was still mostly empty at that hour. She sat in the truck for a moment after she parked. Ranger looked at her. She said, I know. She took the notebooks and the map and her own notes inside. The desk officer was a young man who looked like he had been awake since 4, which he probably had. She told him she needed to speak with Sheriff Boyd Harmon. The young man said the sheriff didn't usually come in until 8. She said she would wait. He looked at the bundle under her arm and at the expression on her face, and he picked up his desk phone. Harmon arrived 19 minutes later. He was 58. Broad through the chest the way men get who were once athletic and have not quite given it up. Silver hair close-cropped, he wore his uniform like he had been wearing it so long. It was just another layer of skin. He looked at Claire in the lobby, and she's watched something move across his face. Recognition. Not of her, of the situation. He knew why she was here before she said a word. "Come on back," he said. His office was small and had too many files in it and smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long. He closed the door, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and sat down himself without ceremony. No small talk, no how was the drive. Just the particular focused quiet of someone who had been waiting for something and was now trying not to show how much. She put everything on his desk. She didn't explain it first, she just laid it out. Earl's 2 notebooks, her own, the county map with the marked locations, the Ziploc bag with the 2 photographs, the note from the toolbox and the note from Ruth's envelope. She set them out the way Earl would have, she thought, methodically. Nothing dramatic about it, just the evidence where it could be seen. Then she told him, all of it. From the night she arrived at Merritt Farm, to the morning she drove away from it 2 hours ago. She spoke steadily and without embellishment, the way Earl had taught her to tell a story. Start with what you saw, then what you concluded. Keep them separate. Harmon listened. He didn't interrupt once. When she finished, the office was very quiet. He picked up the first notebook, turned several pages slowly, reading. Set it down and picked up her notebook. Read her observations. Put that down too and looked at the map for a long time. Then he opened his bottom desk drawer. He took out a thin manila folder and set it on the desk between them. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed transcript of a recorded phone call, and at the bottom a date, 6 months ago, to the day. The time was 9:42 in the evening. She looked at it, then at him. "That's his handwriting," he said. "In those notebooks. I can see it from here. I'd know it anywhere. We trained together in Knoxville 31 years ago. He was 2 years ahead of me, and he never let me forget it," she said. "He called you." Boyd Harmon leaned back in his chair. "He called me on a Tuesday night," he said. 9:42. I was home. I picked up and I knew from his voice right away that something was wrong. Not panicked. Earl never panicked, but careful. The way him sounds when he's choosing every word. He said, "Boyd, if you don't hear from me in a week, find Claire." He said the rest of it, what he was watching, what he'd found. He'd send me the documentation separately. Said he wasn't comfortable saying it over the phone. Said he'd drive it out himself inside 2 days. He paused. "The documentation never arrived," he said. "And 3 days after that call, they found his truck." Claire was very still, she said. "You were waiting." "I was waiting," he said. "I didn't know where you were. I called the Harlow office to ask if anyone had been in contact with Earl's next of kin, and they said they were handling it. Reeves was the one who told me that. Tom Reeves, specifically. Said the family had been notified and everything was being looked after. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. She said, "Reeves told you the family was being handled." "Yes. So you stopped asking." He met her eyes and didn't look away. "I stopped asking," he said. "And I will carry that for the rest of my career. I should have pushed harder. I knew something was wrong, and I let a man I trusted tell me to stand down, and I stood down." The room was quiet. She looked at the printed transcript on his desk. She thought about Earl on a Tuesday evening making a phone call, choosing every word, knowing he was running low on time, and then driving out to Merritt Farm sometime in those next 3 days, going into the hidden room, putting the key on the porch where she would find it, making sure Ranger knew where to lead her, doing all of that, and then disappearing. She said, "What do we do now?" Harmon looked at the notebooks, then the map, then at her. "Now," he said, "we build the rest of it." He spent the next 2 hours on the phone, not with the Caldwell County office, with the State Bureau of Investigation, and with a federal contact he referred to only by a first name. She sat in a chair in the hallway and drank coffee from a machine that produced something coffee adjacent and tried not to count the minutes. Ranger waited in the truck. She checked on him twice. When Harmon came out of his office, he had his jacket on and a legal pad covered in notes. They're going to pull the Greystone records, he said. Corporate filings, property transfers, anything connected to Pelton's LLC. That'll take a couple of days. In the meantime, I want everything you have, the originals, photographed and copied. You keep copies. We keep originals. She nodded. He looked at her for a moment. You drove 40 miles with everything Earl spent 3 years collecting, he said. You had no way of knowing if I was the right person to trust, she said. Earl told me you were. And Earl was a careful man. Harmon was quiet for a second. Yes, he was, he said. Best I ever knew. She drove back to Merritt Farm with copies of everything she had brought, and an arrangement to check in with Harmon's office every 24 hours. She had 2 contact numbers, a main line and a cell. She was told to use the cell if anything felt urgent. She stopped at the gas station outside Harlow on the way back, filled the tank, let Ranger out for 5 minutes in the strip of grass along the fence line, bought a water bottle and a bag of pretzels, which was breakfast technically, if you were generous about the definition. She was back at Merritt Farm before 11. She parked in the usual spot, got out, looked at the house and the barn and the fence line and the empty road. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. That evening she stood at the back window again and watched County Road 7. The trucks came. Tuesday night, right on schedule. 2 of them. Dimmed headlights, moving slow and deliberate through the dark toward Greystone. She wrote the time and the count and the direction and folded the note into an envelope she would take to Harmon's office in the morning. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and careful, and more awake than she had been in months. Ranger slept pressed against her feet that night. She slept better than she expected, which surprised her. Earl had always said that clarity was its own comfort, even when the things you were clear about were hard. When you stop not knowing, you stop bracing for the unknown. The known is easier to carry, even when it's heavier. She thought he was right about that. She was almost asleep when she heard something. Not a knock, not the trucks. A sound from the side of the house, near the north end, below the bedroom window. Something soft, a single footstep maybe. Or maybe nothing, maybe just the wind. Ranger lifted his head. She lay still. Another sound. This one definitely a footstep. Deliberate, slow. Someone who was trying not to make noise, which meant someone who knew making noise was possible, which meant someone who understood the house was occupied. She got up, boots on without turning on any lights. She moved to the bedroom door and eased it open and went down the hall to the north-facing window at the end. She looked down. A figure in the side yard, not moving toward the door, not moving anywhere, just standing at the corner of the house, half in shadow, looking at the south field, at the road, standing there like a man thinking something through. She could not see his face. She watched. After maybe 2 minutes, the figure moved, walked toward the back fence slowly, not hiding now, stopped at the gate that led to the back field, and then he sat down on the fence rail, which was not what someone came to threaten you did. She went downstairs, through the kitchen. She unlocked the back door quietly and stepped out onto the back porch. Cold air, clear sky. The stars were very bright. The man on the fence rail heard her and turned. Tom Reeves. He looked exactly as she remembered, mid-40s, solid build. The face of a man who had been doing something he wasn't proud of for long enough that it had settled into him. He was not in uniform. He was in civilian clothes, a canvas jacket, dark jeans, work boots. He had driven here in a personal vehicle. He had not come to her door. He said, "I didn't come to scare you," she said. Too late. He almost smiled. Then he didn't. Ranger was on the porch behind her, not growling, just there, which was strange enough that she registered it. He said, "I want you to know something. Before whatever happens next happens. I didn't know Grimes was going to die. I want that on record somewhere. With a person. I know it doesn't change anything legally, but I need to say it." She stood very still. She didn't speak. He looked out at the field. "I was supposed to look the other way," he said. "That's all they asked me to do at first. Don't ask questions about the trucks. Don't flag the wait at the grain elevator. Don't investigate the property transfers. Just look away. They paid me well for it, and I told myself it was victimless. Paperwork, land, numbers. He stopped. She waited, and then Grimes, he said. Walter Grimes asked me about the trucks himself. Asked me directly. He was 74 years old, and he had eyes like a hawk, and he had watched that road for 30 years, and he knew something was wrong. I told Whitfield he was asking questions. I thought. I don't know what I thought. That they'd talk to him. Offer him something. I didn't. He looked at his boots. The accident report, he said. I wrote what I was told to write. The night air between them was very cold, she said. What do you want, Reeves? He looked up. I want to tell you what's moving through Greystone, he said, because you don't know yet. I know Earl's notebooks. I know what he saw and what he couldn't see from where he was watching. I can fill in what's missing. She looked at him for a long moment, and she thought. And she had Harmon's number in her jacket pocket. And this could be a trap. And she was standing in a dark field with a man she had every reason not to trust. And Ranger was not growling. And Earl had written about Ranger's instincts in a margin note 11 months ago, and trusted them more than his own, she said. Talk. Stolen heavy equipment, he said. Agricultural machinery. Combines, excavators, some of it industrial. Moving up from Mississippi and Alabama through 3 counties. Greystone is the midpoint. They hold it there, strip the serial numbers, re-register it through Pelton's company, and it goes out to buyers as refurbished salvage. It's been running 4 years. Whitfield is the hub. Pelton makes it legal on paper. There are buyers in 4 states. She processed that. Earl's notation in the margin. Not grain or fertilizer. Equipment. She said, who else is in it? Beyond Whitfield and Pelton. 2 drivers, he said, not local. They rotate. And 1 man at Greystone who runs the equipment there. His name is on a lease agreement under Pelton's company. I have copies. I've had copies for 3 months, she said. Why didn't you go to someone 3 months ago? He looked at her straight. Because the person I would have gone to was the Caldwell County Sheriff, and Whitfield put that man in office. The current sheriff. Not Boyd Harmon. The Caldwell County Sheriff. Which was why Earl had written "Don't go to the Harlow office" in bold letters and underlined it. She said, Whitfield has the sheriff. Has had him for 6 years, Reeves said. Since the election. I didn't know that when I started. I found out later. By then I was already in it far enough that getting out looked worse than staying. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded envelope. Held it out. Copies of what I have, he said. Lease documents, a shipment schedule, names of the buyers in other states, and a record of payments. To me, dated with amounts. She looked at the envelope. This implicates you, she said. I know, you're giving me evidence against yourself. Yes. She took the envelope. She said, why? He looked out at the field again, at the dark road beyond it. Because your grandfather spent 3 years watching this happen and trying to stop it the right way, he said. And it cost him his life. And the least I can do, the very least, is make sure it actually stops. She said nothing. He said, I'll testify. Whatever they need. I want protective custody for my wife and my daughter first. After that, I'll say everything in front of whoever you want. She thought. Harmon. Call Harmon. She said, can you be in Dunmore tomorrow morning? Yes, she said. I'm going to give you a phone number. You call that number tonight. You tell them you're Tom Reeves, and you have information, and you're prepared to cooperate fully. You give them what you gave me, and you tell them what you told me, and you let them handle the protection for your family. He nodded. She gave him Harmon's cell number from memory. He wrote it on his palm. For a moment neither of them moved. She said, Reeves. The call Earl made to Dunmore. 3 days before he disappeared. Did Whitfield know about it? He looked at her. Yes, she had known that was the answer. But hearing it was different, she said, who told him. The Caldwell County office monitors calls from the jail line, he said. But not just the jail. They've got a tap on the Dunmore number. Whitfield had it put in 2 years ago through a contact at the phone company. Unofficial. Illegal. Which means, she thought, which means Earl made that call knowing it might be heard. Knowing it might not even matter. Calling anyway, because it was the right thing to do and he was out of time. She pressed her hand against her jacket pocket. She went inside. She did not sleep. At 2:15 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that she understood immediately was Harmon, using a line he hadn't given her yet. 2 words: call received. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. Ranger pressed closer against her leg. She stared at the ceiling. 3 days later, the world was still looking exactly like nothing was happening. Which was, she had come to understand, the best possible sign that something was. She painted the south side of the house. She repaired the barn door hinges. She planted 24 bulbs along the front fence that Ruth had brought her in a paper bag, tulips that would not come up until spring. She worked the way Earl had taught her to work, steadily, without rushing, making sure each piece was solid before moving on. On Thursday morning, Harmon called her direct line. He said, "Tomorrow night." She said, "Friday." "Trucks run Friday," she said. "That's right." She sat down at the kitchen table. He said, "We need you to stay in the house. Don't go to the road, don't go to the barn after 9. We'll have people in position from dusk. The goal is to take them at Greystone in the act. We've got a federal team and 2 state units. The Caldwell County office is not being notified." She said, "What about the sheriff?" "He'll know about it at the same time everyone else does," Harmon said. "When it's over." She said, "Pelton." "Warrant's ready," he said. "We move on his office simultaneously." She said, "And Whitfield?" Harmon was quiet for just a second. "Whitfield will be at Greystone," he said. "He's there every Friday." Reeves confirmed it. She thought about the man in the canvas jacket at the hardware store. The warm smile, the hand on her truck, the eyes that recognized Ranger. 30 years, she thought. "Earl called you a friend for 30 years, she said. "Okay, I'll stay in." "Good. And Claire?" She waited. "You've done everything right," Harmon said. Earl would have done it the same way. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Friday came in gray and cold. A proper October day. She cooked a real breakfast for the first time in a while. Eggs and toast and coffee that she actually let steep long enough. She ate at the kitchen table, with Ranger beside her, and looked out the window at the empty road and the bare field and the pale sky, and tried to feel something other than the particular hollow tension of waiting. She spent the afternoon doing normal things. This was harder than it sounded. She read for a while. She could not tell you later what the book was about. She reorganized the kitchen shelves, which needed doing regardless. She sat on the porch in the cold for an hour, and watched the road and the field and the distant tree line, and thought about Earl out here doing the same thing, night after night, writing it all down in his small, careful handwriting, with the conviction that it would matter eventually. It was mattering now. That had to count for something. At 7 in the evening, when the dark was fully settled, she turned off every light in the house except the small lamp in the kitchen, which was visible from the road, and told anyone watching that the house was occupied in the most ordinary way. She moved to the back window. Ranger was already there. They waited together. At 8:40 she saw the first headlights on County Road 7. Too early. She checked her notebook against the pattern. Always after 11. Always. She looked closer. Not trucks. 2 vehicles, moving slowly, pulling off the road about a quarter mile from the Greystone turnoff. Dark vehicles. No markings visible. They cut their lights after they stopped. Harmon's people. She let out a breath. More vehicles positioned over the next hour. She counted 4 in total that she could pick out, all of them dark and still. Anyone driving the road would see nothing. Just darkness and field. That was the point. At 11:22 the first truck appeared. Commercial size. Running dimmed lights. Followed 3 minutes later by a second. Moving slow and deliberate the way they always did. Comfortable, routine. These were men who had made this drive dozens of times without incident. They turned onto the Greystone access road. 2 minutes passed. Maybe 3. Then the lights. Not gradual. All at once. Floods lighting up the Greystone property from 3 sides. The kind of brightness that turns night into noon. And from where she stood she could see it like a sunrise on the wrong side of the sky. Red and blue strobes on top of it, pulsing through the trees. And voices, distant but audible in the cold clear air, amplified through something. Doors. Orders. Ranger stood very still beside her. She gripped the windowsill. She had known this was coming. She had spent 2 weeks making it possible. But standing at the window, watching the lights pulse above the tree line on County Road 7, watching the thing Earl had spent 3 years working toward finally arrive, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief, just something very quiet and very full. The way a room feels when you open all the windows after a long winter, she said softly. Into the dark of the kitchen. This is it, Earl. This is what you were waiting for. Ranger leaned against her leg. The lights on the road pulsed on. She watched until her eyes burned. She did not move from the window for a long time, because this was Earl's watch, and she was keeping it. She was still at the window at 1:15 in the morning when headlights turned into her driveway. She recognized the vehicle. Boyd Harmon's personal truck, not a marked cruiser. He got out and walked to the porch and knocked once. She opened the door. His face was composed and tired. He held his hat in his hand, which she noticed. He said, "Whitfield is in custody. Pelton was taken at his home at 11:30. 2 drivers. The man at Greystone. 6 arrests in total." She waited. He said, "We found documentation on site. Records of shipments, registration paperwork, payments. Everything Reeves described and more." "And Reeves," she said. "In protective custody as of this afternoon," he said. "His family is safe." She nodded. She said, "And Earl?" Harmon looked at her steadily. He said, "We found enough tonight to formally reclassify his disappearance as a homicide investigation. It was Whitfield. We don't have a body yet. We may not. But we have a record of a payment made to one of the drivers in the week Earl disappeared, and a phone call between Whitfield and the driver the night before Earl's truck was found. The night air was very cold." She said, "Okay." She said it the way you say something when you already knew it and are just receiving confirmation. Because she had known it since the second notebook. She had known it since she read Earl's last entry. She had known it the way you know things that you spend a long time not saying out loud because saying them makes them real. Harmon said, "I'm sorry, Claire." She said, "So am I." He stood there a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out an envelope. "This was in the Greystone records," he said. "In a locked box in the office there, among papers connected to the operation." She looked at the envelope. Her name on the front. Earl's handwriting. She took it. Harmon looked at her for a long moment. He put his hat back on. He told her she could call him anytime, day or night, for anything she needed. He told her she had done something that most people would not have done. And he told her Earl had known she would do it, because he knew her better than she knew herself. Then he walked back to his truck and drove down Merritt Road, and the taillights disappeared around the bend. Claire stood on the porch with the envelope in both hands. The night was very still. Inside, the small lamp in the kitchen cast its light through the window the way it had every evening since she arrived, warm and steady, like something that had no intention of going out. She sat down on the porch steps. Ranger came and pressed against her side. She opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long. She had not expected 3 pages. Earl was not a man who used 10 words when 5 would do. But these were 3 full pages, written in his careful hand, the lines straight without ruling the way they always were, because he had practiced that since he was young, and it had simply become the way he wrote. She sat on the porch step in the cold and read every word. "My dear Becca, if you're reading this, then something happened before I could explain it myself. I'm sorry for that. More than I know how to say. I tried to time everything carefully, and I clearly didn't time it well enough. And that is my failure, not yours. And I need you to know that from the beginning. You may have spent these past months angry at me. I would understand that. You may have thought I left you on purpose. I need you to know I did not. I would never leave you, on purpose. Every choice I made in the last 3 years was about making sure that if the worst happened, you would have what you needed to be safe. To understand. To not be alone in it. I know that's not the same as being there. I know." She stopped. She breathed. Continued. "There are things I should have told you sooner. I kept waiting for the right time, and the truth is, there is no right time for certain conversations. You just have to have them. That's a lesson I learned too late, and I'm writing it down now in case it helps you with your own life later on. Here is what I want you to know. I was afraid. I want to say that clearly because I spent a lot of years not saying it. I was afraid for a long time. After your parents died, I was afraid I would fall apart in a way that couldn't be put back together, and I almost did. You know that, I think, even if we never said it directly. And then you were asleep on my couch one night, and I looked at you and I thought, this child trusts me, and that was the thing. That one thing. That was what got me back up. You didn't save me by doing anything. You saved me just by being there and trusting me to be okay. I have never told you that before. I should have. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. The porch step was cold through her jeans. The stars were very bright. Ranger was warm against her side, and she could feel him breathing slow and even, and she focused on that for a moment. Then she kept reading. About Dale. I know you'll have found the photographs by now. I know because Ranger would have led you there eventually. He always went to that tree when he wanted to think. I don't know why. Dogs are strange that way. Dale was my closest friend for 30 years. That is simply true, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. We came up together. We understood each other. There was a time when I would have trusted that man with anything. What he became slowly. That's the thing about corruption that nobody tells you. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in degrees. A small look the other way, then a slightly larger one. Then one day, you look up and the man you thought you knew is doing things that would have horrified the younger version of him. And he has told himself so many small stories along the way that he no longer sees the distance between where he started and where he ended up. I don't know exactly when Dale crossed the line he couldn't come back from. I have thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything else these past 3 years. Trying to find the moment. Trying to understand it. I think what matters is not the moment. What matters is that he crossed it. And once you're across, you protect where you are instead of going back. That's what fear does to people. It makes them defend the wrong things. I was afraid of that same tendency in myself once. A long time ago. I'm glad I had you to pull me back before I found out how far I could have gone. She turned the page. Her hands were not entirely steady now. The things I need to say that are just for you. You are 23 years old and you have already had more taken from you than most people carry in a lifetime. Your parents. Then the years of watching me put myself back together. Then this. I have thought many times about whether it was fair to leave you what I left you at that farm. Whether it was right to put that weight on your shoulders. And every time I come back to the same answer. I left it to you because you are the only person I know who would handle it correctly. Not because you're fearless. You're not. I've seen you afraid plenty of times. But you think when you're afraid. You slow down instead of rushing. You write things down. You wait for what's true before you act on what feels true. That's not common, Becca. That is genuinely not common. You got that from your mother, I think, more than from me. She was the same way. Quiet and steady and harder to knock over than she looked. I miss her every day. I think you probably do too, even when you don't say it. I want to tell you one more thing. You once asked me what the bravest thing I ever did was. We were driving back from the county fair. You were maybe 12. You asked me and I said something about the job, about a call I took once that went sideways and how I handled it. I gave you the easy answer, the one that sounded right. The real answer is this. The bravest thing I ever did was get up off that kitchen floor and pour the whiskey down the drain and walk into the living room and look at a little girl who had already lost everything and decide to be someone she could count on. That is the thing I am most proud of in my life. Not the badge. Not the years. Not any of it. Just that one choice. On that one night. When I was so afraid of myself that I could barely stand up, she stopped reading for a moment. She looked out at the field. The dark was very deep past the fence line, and the stars were doing what they always did out here, which was filling the sky in a way that the city never allowed. Earl had loved this sky. She understood that now in a way she hadn't when she arrived. He had not come to this farm just to watch a road. He had come here because this was the place where the sky was still big enough to remind a man of his actual size. Small, trying, doing the best he could with what he had. She went back to the letter, and then the thing I said about you saving me. I mean it completely. I have never meant anything more. You taught me that tomorrow was worth getting to. You did that without trying, just by being a child who needed tomorrow to arrive. I needed it to arrive for you first, And then somewhere along the way I started needing it for myself again too. Don't ever think you were a burden to me. Don't ever think that. Not for 1 second. She was crying now. She had told herself she was done with crying and she had meant it at the time. Apparently she had been wrong. Which was fine. This was the kind of wrong that didn't need correcting. She let it happen. She sat on the porch steps in the cold Tennessee night and she cried quietly, the way you cry when you're not performing it for anyone. Just letting the thing move through you and out of you, because that is the only real way through anything. Ranger pressed harder against her side. When it passed, she wiped her face with her jacket sleeve and looked up at the sky. She turned to the last page. There were only a few lines left. I am more proud of you than I have ever known how to say, and that is the one failure of mine I truly regret. I should have said it more. Out loud. Not saved it for letters. Say the things out loud, Becca. Don't be like me. Love the people who are worth loving. Trust the ones who earn it. And take care of that old dog because he has more sense than either of us combined. Your grandfather, always. Earl. She almost folded the letter there, but she turned the page over and found one more line. Written in the lower right corner in slightly different ink. The pressure a little heavier, like it had been added standing up or in a hurry or both. I taught you how to watch the world carefully, but what you taught me, without knowing it, was that it was still worth watching. Don't ever stop. She held the letter against her chest with both hands. She sat there. The wind moved through the dry grass in the south field with that sound she had grown used to, the paper shuffle of this place at night. The old rocking chair at the far end of the porch shifted slightly in the wind, the way it always did. She looked at the rocking chair. Empty, but not the way empty used to feel. Not that hollow, terrible absence she had carried everywhere for 6 months. Something else. The kind of empty that still holds the shape of what was there. Like a pressed flower, like a worn place in a wooden step where someone stood for years. She folded the letter, all 3 pages, pressed the fold flat with her thumb, the way Earl pressed everything he handled, carefully, like small details mattered, because he believed they did. She put it in her jacket pocket over her heart. She sat there until the cold finally got to her, which took a while, and then she went inside. Boyd Harmon came back the next morning. He arrived just after 8, in his personal truck, not a marked vehicle. She had coffee ready, because she had heard the engine on the road and recognized the particular sound of it. She poured 2 cups and put them on the kitchen table, and sat down and waited. He knocked once and she said, "Come in," and he did. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been awake, doing something that mattered. He sat down across from her and put his hat on the table between them, and wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. She said, "Tell me," he told her. 6 arrests total. Whitfield, Pelton, 2 drivers from out of state, the man who ran operations at Greystone, and 1 additional name she didn't recognize who turned out to be a buyer in Kentucky who had purchased 3 pieces of stripped equipment over the past 18 months. The federal team had been thorough. The documentation recovered from Greystone was, in Harmon's words, more complete than they had any right to hope for. She said, "Pelton kept records." Harmon almost smiled. "Pelton kept everything," he said. "Every transaction, every payment, every date. He was the kind of man who believed the paperwork would protect him if things went sideways. What he didn't account for was the paperwork being used against him," she said, "and Whitfield." Harmon set down his cup. He said, "Dale Whitfield is in federal custody. His attorney entered a not guilty plea this morning, which was expected. What was less expected was that Whitfield asked, before the arraignment, to send a message through his attorney to Earl's family. She waited. The message, Harmon said carefully, was 3 words. "He's sorry. That's all." His attorney read it from a notacard, and that was all Whitfield said. The kitchen was very quiet. She thought about the photograph. 2 young men in uniform beside a patrol car, one hand resting on a shoulder with the ease of 30 years. Some friendships don't survive the truth. She thought about Earl writing those words. She thought about what it cost him to write them. Not with anger, just with the particular sorrow of a man who had watched someone he loved become something he couldn't defend, she said. He should have thought about that before. Yes, Harmon said. He should have. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, Reeves. His family is safe, Harmon said. They were relocated yesterday. He finished his testimony last night. 14 hours total, over 2 sessions. Everything he said was consistent with what he told you at the fence and more. There are aspects of this operation that even Earl's notebooks didn't capture. Reeves filled in every gap. She nodded. He said, what Reeves did was wrong. For a long time. But what he did at the end of it, coming to you, coming to us, testifying fully when he had options to stay quiet and protect himself, that took something. I want you to know I believe that, she said. I believe it too. She did. She had thought about it many times since that night at the back fence, the way he had sat down on the rail, the way he had not tried to minimize what he had done, the way he had said I didn't know Grimes was going to die, not as an excuse but as the one true thing he needed someone to know. She didn't forgive him for what he had done. She wasn't sure forgiveness was hers to give. But she understood the difference between a man who had made terrible choices and a man who had no conscience left. Reeves still had his, barely. But it was there, and in the end he had used it. That counted for something. Harmon picked up his hat. There's one more thing, he said. He reached into his jacket and set a small envelope on the table. This was recovered from a locked drawer in Whitfield's office at the Agricultural Supply Building, he said. Not at Greystone. At his main office. It was filed in a folder with property documents, which is likely why it survived the arrest. His office manager found it when she was going through files this morning at the investigator's request. She recognized Earl's handwriting. Claire looked at the envelope. Her name on the front. Earl's hand. The same 2 letters he had never rushed. How long had it been there, she said. Harmon said, based on the folder it was in, we believe it was placed there sometime in the last year. Maybe 14 months ago, maybe a little more, which meant Earl had placed something in Dale Whitfield's own office building, in a folder of property documents where no one would look for a personal letter, where it would survive anything that happened to the farm or to Earl or to the hidden room behind the barn, because he knew even then. He knew that if things went wrong, the evidence would eventually lead investigators to Whitfield's offices, and he knew that whatever was in that office would be found. He had left her one more letter in the last place anyone would think to look. She said, give me a few minutes. Harmon nodded. He took his coffee and walked out to the porch without being asked, because he was the kind of man who understood when to be somewhere else. She opened the envelope. It was shorter than the first letter. 1 page. Written quickly, she could tell. The lines not quite as straight. Becca. If this one finds you, it means things went further than I hoped. I'm sorry for that too. I seem to be sorry for a lot of things in these letters, which is something I wish I had addressed in person while I had the chance. I put this here because Dale will never look at his own property records. He has people for that. And when investigators go through his offices, which they will if you did what I think you'll do, they'll find this eventually. I want you to know something about Dale. He was a good man once. That's not an excuse. It's just true. I want you to hold on to that, not for his sake, but for yours. Because the world is easier to live in when you can see people clearly, all of what they are, not just the worst version. He was my friend. He also did terrible things. Both of those facts are real and neither one erases the other. Don't let what he became make you afraid to trust people. That would be the worst outcome of all this. And I don't think it will. Because you are not me, you are braver about people than I ever was. One last thing. You came to that farm to survive. I know that's why you came. I know you didn't expect to stay. Stay anyway. That place has been waiting for someone who believed it was worth saving. I believe that person is you. I believed it before any of this started. I'll be with you in everything you build there, Earl. She sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. Outside she could hear Harmon on the porch, the faint creak of a boot, the distant sound of a crow somewhere past the fence line, the ordinary sounds of a morning that had arrived the way mornings do, without asking. She thought about what Earl had written. You came to survive. Stay anyway. She folded the second letter carefully and put it in her pocket with the first, both of them now, resting together over her heart like something she had been carrying longer than she knew. She went to the back door and opened it and said, Boyd. He came back inside. She said, I want to ask you something. He sat down. She said, Earl knew what he was walking into, didn't he? At the end, he knew and he kept going. Harmon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think he knew it was possible. I think he also believed that if he stopped it would keep happening. And he couldn't live with that. She said, that's what I thought. She looked at the badge hanging on the wall beside the back door. Earl's badge. She had put it there on her first week at the farm, not ceremonially, just on a hook, the way you hang something you don't want to put in a drawer. She said, how many people did this affect? The operation. Beyond what's already on record. Harmon considered. 3 counties, he said. 7 confirmed property transfers under duress or deception. Walter Grimes is the only confirmed fatality connected to the operation directly. Earl's case will be classified as homicide. So, 2 deaths. 7 families who lost property they shouldn't have lost. And whatever the downstream effect was of all that stolen equipment moving through the system. She said, is there anything being done about the families who lost the land? He said, that's a civil matter. The criminal case won't return their property automatically. Some of them may have grounds to pursue it, but it's complicated. She said, Ed, will anyone help them navigate that? He looked at her, steadily. I can connect them with a victim's advocate at the state level, he said. But they'll need someone local who knows the situation and can help them understand their options. Most of them are elderly. Most of them don't have money for legal counsel. She said, okay. He waited. She said, I'll need their contact information. When you're able to share it. He looked at her for a moment, with an expression she didn't quite have a name for. Something between recognition and something older than that. Like seeing a thing you have been waiting to see and not being entirely surprised when it arrives. He said, I'll have someone send it over this week. After Harmon left, she stood in the kitchen for a while without doing anything in particular. Ranger was at her feet. The morning light had shifted and was coming through the window, at the angle it did in October, long and warm, and carrying no promises about how long it would last. She thought about the 7 families. She thought about elderly people in 3 counties who had been told, in various careful legal ways, that they had no choice, that the papers were in order, that everything was above board, that a man with a friendly face and a firm handshake had offered them fair value, and they should be grateful. She thought about Walter Grimes, who had watched County Road 7 for 31 years, and had asked one question too many. She thought about what asking that question had cost him. She was 23 years old. She had a farmhouse, 2 notebooks full of Earl's handwriting, and a brass key that still sat on the kitchen windowsill, because she could not bring herself to put it away. She also had Earl's voice in her head, clear as anything. Start with what you can do, then do the next thing. Don't try to carry the whole weight at once. Just find the first step and take it. She went to the table and opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top she wrote the names of the 3 counties. Below that she wrote 7 families. Property, legal options, advocate contact. Below that she drew a line and wrote, what do I actually know how to do? She sat with that question for a while. She was not a lawyer. She was not an investigator. She was not Boyd Harmon with 30 years of law enforcement behind her. But she knew how to research. She knew how to write things down. She knew how to sit with complicated information until the pattern in it became clear. She knew how to pay attention to small things when everyone else was looking at the large ones. Earl had not been a lawyer either. He had been a man with notebooks and patience, and the conviction that, if you watched carefully enough and wrote down what you saw, eventually the truth had nowhere left to hide. She wrote one more line under the list. Find the first step. Then she closed the notebook and went outside. The days that followed had a quality she had not experienced since before Earl disappeared. Not peace exactly. More like the particular kind of quiet that settles after a long tension releases. Like the air after a storm, when everything is wet and clear, and the light comes through at angles it never manages on ordinary days. She worked. She painted the south-facing wall of the farmhouse, which had needed it since she arrived. She reinforced the barn door hinges with hardware she had bought in Harlow, the proper kind that would hold through a Tennessee winter. She dug out the vegetable bed along the east fence that had gone to weeds and turned the soil and covered it with straw for the season. Ruth came on Sunday with apple butter and stayed for 2 hours. They sat on the porch in the thin October sun and drank tea and talked about the kinds of things people talk about when they have come through something difficult and are on the other side of it, looking back. Ruth talked about her husband who had been gone 11 years, and about how long it had taken her to stop expecting to hear his truck in the driveway at 6 o'clock in the evening. She said, "You don't stop missing people. You just get better at carrying it without putting it down in the wrong places." Claire said, "That's exactly right." Ruth looked at her. "You sound like Earl when you say things like that," she said. "Not the words, just the way you say them. Like you've thought about it for a long time before you say it." Claire looked out at the field. She said, "I think I'm becoming someone I didn't know he was teaching me to be." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think he knew exactly what he was teaching you. He just knew better than to say it directly, because you would have argued." She laughed. It surprised her, real and sudden and without any of the complicated weight that laughter had carried for months. Ruth smiled. "There it is," she said. The county victim's advocate was a woman named Sandra Briggs, who worked out of an office in the Dunmore courthouse and had been doing this work for 19 years. She called Claire on a Wednesday after Harmon passed along the referral. They talked for 40 minutes. Sandra knew the legal landscape around fraudulent property transfers and had worked cases like this before, smaller ones, but the structure was familiar to her. She said, "The challenge with elderly victims in rural counties is that they often don't know what they're entitled to pursue. They've been told the paperwork was legal. They believe it. Some of them are embarrassed to have been deceived. They don't reach out." Claire said, "What if someone reached out to them first?" Sandra said, "That changes everything." They arranged to coordinate. Sandra would handle the legal advocacy. Claire would be the first contact, the person who called or drove out and sat with these families, and explained what had happened and what options existed, and made sure they understood they were not alone in it and had not done anything wrong. Not official, not a title or a salary. Just a person who showed up, which was, she had come to understand, the most important kind. She drove out to the first family on a Thursday, an elderly woman named Dorothy Halstead, 76, who lived alone on a property adjacent to one of the parcels Whitfield had acquired. Dorothy had not lost her own land, but her neighbor had, a man named Frank Overton, who had sold under circumstances that Sandra Briggs now believed constituted financial elder abuse. Frank had since moved to assisted living in another county. Dorothy had watched it happen and had not known what to do. She opened the door when Claire knocked and looked at her with the cautious expression of someone who had learned to be careful about who she let in. Claire said, "Mrs. Halstead, my name is Claire Merritt. My grandfather was Earl Merritt. I'm not here to sell you anything or ask you for anything. I just want to talk to you about what happened to your neighbor." Dorothy Halstead looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider and said, "You'd better come in." They talked for 2 hours at her kitchen table. Dorothy had seen things over the past 3 years that she had not known were significant. Trucks she didn't recognize. A man from Pelton's office who had come out to the Overton property twice. A conversation she had overheard at the hardware store between Whitfield and the current Caldwell County Sheriff, the one Whitfield had backed into office, in which certain names were mentioned in ways that made her uncomfortable, but that she had told herself she was misunderstanding. She had not been misunderstanding. Claire wrote it all down. She drove back to Merritt Farm in the late afternoon, with 4 pages of notes, and the particular feeling of having done something small that was not actually small. The sun was dropping behind the western ridge, and the light on the fields was that brief, specific gold that only happens in October and only lasts about 20 minutes. She pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment. Ranger was waiting at the top of the porch steps. She got out and climbed the steps, and he walked beside her to the door. She put her hand on his back. He was slower than he had been when she arrived. She noticed it more each week, the measured pace of an old dog, who had been doing this for a long time and had no intention of stopping, but was also not pretending he was young. She scratched behind his ears and said, "Good day." He leaned into her hand. Inside, the kitchen was exactly as she had left it. The late light coming through the window. Earl's badge on the hook beside the back door. The coffee mug on the counter that said "Home is where love waits" in letters that had faded to a kind of soft pink. She made coffee. She sat at the table and opened her notebook and wrote up what Dorothy Halstead had told her, organized by date and by name, the way Earl had organized his notes. Clean and factual. Conclusions separate from observations. When she finished, she looked at the page. Then she looked up at the badge. She thought about what it represented. Not the authority of it. Not the institution. Just what Earl had meant by it. What he had demonstrated with it. The simple conviction that some things were worth your time even when they cost you. Especially then. That a life spent paying attention to the right things was not a wasted life. Even if no one was watching. Even if no one ever knew. She stood up and took the badge off the hook. She turned it over in her hands, the weight of it. The dull shine of something that had been handled for years. Merritt engraved on the back in letters that were starting to wear smooth. She hung it back on the hook. Some things stayed where they were, but they meant something different now. On a Saturday in late October, she drove to the animal shelter on Alderman Street in Harlow. She had not planned to. She had driven into town for hardware and paint, and on the way back, she found herself turning around in the pharmacy parking lot without quite deciding to, which was the way she had come to recognize certain right decisions. They didn't announce themselves. They just arrived as a direction her hands were already moving. The dog they brought out was 9 years old. A hound mix with ears that didn't match, one up and one folded, and the kind of face that had clearly seen a great deal and had arrived at some settled understanding about it. He had come in as a stray, and his time was almost up. She sat on the floor of the visitation room. He came over and sniffed her hand. Then he sat down next to her, close, and leaned against her arm with his full weight. Like he was tired of being uncertain. Like he had decided this was fine. She thought about a parking lot on Route 9. An old man sitting in the gravel without reaching out. Just being present. Just waiting for a frightened animal to understand that presence without pressure was a kind of promise. She said, "All right, let's go." She named him Chester. When she brought him through the farm gate, Ranger was waiting. He walked up to Chester unhurried, nose out, reading everything there was to read. Chester stood still and let him. They sniffed each other for a long moment. Then Ranger turned and walked back to the porch, and Chester followed. Simple as that. She stood in the driveway, watching them go, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. The particular lightness of a right thing done quietly, without audience, just because it was right. The weeks moved. She called the 7 families one by one. 2 of them were not interested in talking. She respected that and left her number and moved on. The other 5 talked to her, some briefly and some at length, and she wrote down everything they said and passed it to Sandra Briggs and let the process work, the way processes work when the right people are paying attention to them. She did not know if it would result in anything concrete for any of them. She knew that someone had called them, someone who showed up, someone who treated what happened to them as something that mattered. That was the first step. She would find the next one. One evening in November, she was at the kitchen table with her notebook when she heard Ranger get up from his spot by the back door. He moved to the window the way he did sometimes, unhurried, just checking. She watched him. He looked out for a moment, then came back and lay down again. Nothing. Just the dark field and the road beyond it, empty and quiet. She looked at the window for a moment. 6 weeks ago she had stood at this same window in the dark, with her notebook and her heartbeat doing something uncomfortable, watching headlights move along County Road 7, and writing down the time. She had been so careful then, so aware of every sound, so attuned to everything that moved outside the walls of this farmhouse. She was still careful. She would always be careful now. Earl had built that into her the way he built everything, slowly and without ceremony, until it was just part of how she was made. But the fear was different. It had not gone away. She was not sure it was supposed to. Earl had been afraid every day of those last 3 years. He had said so himself, and it had not stopped him from doing what needed doing. Fear and action were not opposites. She understood that now in a way that was not philosophical but actual, lived in her body, practiced every day. She looked back down at her notebook. She was writing a letter to the State Housing Authority on behalf of Frank Overton, the man who had sold his land under duress and moved to assisted living in another county. She had spoken to Frank twice on the phone. He was 81, and he was sharp, and he was quietly furious about what had happened to him. The kind of fury that had nowhere to go until someone told him it had somewhere to go. She was giving it somewhere to go. It would probably take months. It might come to nothing. The legal pathways were complicated, and the documentation was incomplete, and Frank Overton was 81 years old in another county, and the world was not built for easy justice. She wrote the letter anyway, because Earl had spent 3 years writing things down, in the certain knowledge that they might not be enough, and had done it anyway because the alternative was saying nothing, and he was not built for saying nothing, and apparently neither was she. She signed the letter and folded it and set it aside. Then she looked up at the badge, then out the window at the dark field, then at Ranger, asleep by the door with Chester pressed against his back. She set out 2 bowls every morning, one for Ranger. One she held for a moment before she set it down, empty, beside his. Not long, just a moment. The way you pause before you let something go, not because you're holding on, but because you want to mark it properly. The way you look at something before you drive away. Then she set it down and let the morning continue. Some mornings, Ruth's truck appeared around the bend before the coffee was done, and that was fine. Some mornings it was just the 2 dogs and the field and the long quiet of a place that had learned to be patient. Both were good. Both were exactly what this farm had always been waiting to be. She was still learning the language of it. The way Earl had said, you had to live somewhere long enough to understand what it was telling you. She thought she was getting there. One evening, just before the last light went, she walked out to the south field, all the way to the fence line. She stood there with the dry grass whispering around her boots and looked back at the farmhouse. The kitchen light was on, warm and yellow in the early dark. The porch with its new boards showing pale against the weathered siding. The barn with its repaired doors and its 2 old occupants visible as shapes through the fence. The oak tree at the north end of the property, where the ground had once given up a waterproof box and 2 photographs and 5 words written on the back of one of them. She stood there long enough that the first stars appeared. Earl had stood in this field. She knew that. She knew it the way you know things that can't be proven but are simply true. He had stood out here and looked back at this house, and thought about what it was worth protecting, and decided it was worth everything. And then he had done what followed with both hands, and whatever time he had left. She thought about what he had written in the second letter. That place has been waiting for someone who believed it was worth saving. I believe that person is you. She looked at the kitchen light. She believed it too. She turned and walked back through the cold, dry grass toward the house, and Ranger appeared at the porch railing and watched her come, and the light stayed on behind him the way lights do when someone has left them burning on purpose. Because someone was coming home. Because that was what this place was now. She climbed the porch steps. She went inside. The door closed behind her, quiet and certain, and the light in the kitchen stayed exactly where it was. Steady, warm, and not going anywhere.